The moment froze as the metallic click of the gun rang out, its barrel aimed directly at my wife. My heart pounded violently against my ribs, the rush of adrenaline making my hands shake. Time seemed to slow, every possible action racing through my mind in an instant. Should I jump in front of her? Try to talk him down? Or create a risky distraction? The decision had to be made in a split second. And then, something happened that stunned everyone. The moving truck rumbled to a stop in front of our new 2-story home, a charming structure nestled within a pristine suburban neighborhood. I stepped out, stretching after the grueling drive, my muscles aching from hours on the road. The air smelled different here, fresher, calmer, almost too perfect. I turned to glance at Clara, my wife, who stood beside me, her county sheriff's badge clipped to her belt. A steely glint rested in her eyes, a stark contrast to the peaceful surroundings. "Ready for this new chapter?" I asked, masking my own nerves with a casual smile. Clara's lips curled into a warm but knowing smile. "Absolutely. Fresh start, good neighbors, a real community." We began unloading boxes under the golden afternoon sun, the quiet hum of sprinklers and distant laughter adding to the idyllic setting. The neighborhood was picture-perfect, manicured lawns, kids playing in the streets, the scent of barbecue drifting through the air. It felt surreal, almost staged, as if we had stepped into the glossy pages of a real estate brochure. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too ideal. A little too polished. A sharp voice cut through the suburban tranquility. "Welcome to the neighborhood." A woman in her mid-50s strode up our driveway, her platinum blonde hair coiffed to perfection, her expression one of unmistakable authority. She clutched a clipboard like a weapon, her piercing gaze scanning us with calculated efficiency. "I'm Marlene, head of the Homeowners Association," she declared briskly. "I personally greet all new residents to ensure they understand our community standards." Clara, ever the professional, extended a firm handshake. "Nice to meet you, Marlene. I'm Clara. This is my husband." Marlene's eyes flicked to the badge on Clara's belt. A flicker of unease crossed her face, but she masked it quickly, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "A sheriff," she said, her tone oddly unreadable. "That's reassuring." I sensed the tension between them almost immediately, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. "We're excited to settle in," I added quickly, attempting to steer the conversation to neutral ground. Marlene's gaze lingered on our property before she finally nodded. "This is a peaceful place, provided that everyone follows the HoA rules." With that, she handed us a thick booklet filled with dense text, a veritable Bible of neighborhood regulations. Clara flipped through the pages, raising an eyebrow. "We'll review these." Marlene's smile never quite reached her eyes. "See that you do." And just like that, she turned on her heel and left, leaving us with a weighty rulebook and an unspoken warning. Days passed, and we settled into our routines. Morning jogs. Weekend barbecues. Quiet evenings on the porch. On the surface, everything seemed fine. But beneath the polished facade of the neighborhood, an unease simmered. One evening, as Clara flipped through the HoA guidebook, she let out a low whistle. "Did you know we need approval for any exterior changes?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. I laughed, shaking my head. "No neon shutters, then?" She smirked. "Or street parking overnight without a permit?" I sighed, the charm of our new home beginning to lose its luster. "It's starting to feel a little restrictive." Clara nodded. "It's more like control." Our concerns were quickly validated by Marlene's relentless scrutiny. She appeared at the most inconvenient times, clipboard in hand, pointing out minor infractions with a practiced smile. A trash can left out an hour too long. Grass growing half an inch higher than the permitted length. One afternoon, as I knelt in the garden, planting a fresh row of flowers, Marlene materialized at my side. "Lovely," she said, her voice as sharp as the shears in my hand. "But did you check the approved floral list? Page 42. I forced a smile, dirt clinging to my gloves. "I'll take a look." She lingered for a moment before finally walking away. But the feeling of being watched never left. Later that night, Clara leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "She's waiting for us to mess up," she murmured. "And the way she watches me, it's creepy." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "We'll handle it. Together." But even as I said it, I knew Marlene wasn't done with us yet. Morning light streamed through the windows as we unpacked the last of our moving boxes. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the rich aroma of coffee, creating a momentary illusion of normalcy. "Finally moved in," I sighed, sinking onto the couch. Clara joined me, though her posture remained tense. "It's coming together. But I feel watched." "Marlene." "A guest." She nodded. "She lingers too long. It's not just about the rules." Before I could respond, a shadow passed by the window. I turned just in time to see Marlene standing at the edge of our yard, clipboard in hand, her gaze scanning our home like an inspector. Clara's jaw tightened. Enough. She strode outside, her sheriff's confidence evident in every step. "Morning, Marlene," Clara greeted firmly. "Can I help you with something?" Marlene feigned surprise. "Oh, just a routine check. Ensuring standards are maintained." Clara folded her arms. "Your visits are becoming intrusive. We know the rules. We're following them." Marlene's smile stiffened. "You, of all people, understand the importance of rules." Clara's eyes narrowed. "I also understand boundaries and respect." For a moment, Marlene said nothing. Then, with a clipped nod, she turned and walked away. I exhaled, stepping beside Clara. "Think she'll stop?" Clara stared out at the street, her expression unreadable. "I hope so. But I doubt it." The neighborhood hummed around us, children waiting for school buses, joggers passing by, sprinklers hissing softly against freshly cut grass. But beneath the surface, something darker brewed. And we were at the center of it. The sun had barely risen when a sharp knock on the door disrupted our morning routine. Clara, still in uniform from her early shift, exchanged a look with me before opening it. Standing outside was Marlene, her ever-present clipboard tucked under one arm. Beside her stood a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a pressed security uniform, a badge pinned to his chest that read, "Carter." "Good morning," Marlene said, her smile overly sweet. "This is Mr. Carter, our new HoA security officer." I frowned. "Security officer? Didn't realize we needed one." Marlene's eyes glinted. "Due to recent concerns about community standards, we're enforcing stricter compliance." Clara crossed her arms. "Concerns? We've followed the rules." Marlene barely faltered. "Your lawn is half an inch too tall, and your trash bins were left out beyond the designated time." My stomach twisted in frustration. "Half an inch? That's ridiculous." Carter took a step forward. "Rules maintain order." Clara's jaw tightened. "There's a difference between maintaining order and overstepping." Marlene's smile never wavered. "We expect full cooperation." As they left, Carter cast a lingering glance over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "They're watching us," Clara murmured. "We need to start watching back." The community center buzzed with quiet tension as neighbors filled the rows of chairs, murmuring amongst themselves. Marlene stood at the front of the room, clipboard in hand, Carter looming beside her like an enforcer. The atmosphere was charged, the air thick with unspoken grievances. Marlene cleared her throat. "We are here to address concerns regarding adherence to community standards." Mrs. Ellis, an elderly woman with a frail frame, hesitantly raised her hand. "I've followed these rules for 20 years, and suddenly I'm being cited for my flower pots?" Whispers rippled through the crowd. Clara stood, her badge catching the light. "Marlene, the HoA's actions feel more like harassment than maintenance." Marlene's expression tightened. "Are you suggesting we're overstepping?" Clara's voice remained steady. "I'm saying residents feel targeted. A community thrives on respect, not fear." Carter's voice was low and menacing. "Rules apply to everyone." A retired teacher, Mr. Rivera, spoke up. "Then enforcement should be fair, not a weapon." The murmurs grew louder. Marlene pursed her lips. "We will consider these concerns." But we all knew that was a lie. That night, as we relaxed in the living room, the sound of another sharp knock at the door set me on edge. Clara exchanged a wary glance with me before opening it. Marlene and Carter stood there, their expressions taut. "We've had reports of violations," Marlene announced. "Your backyard fence." Clara's eyes narrowed. "We haven't made any changes." Carter's hand hovered near his gun. "We need to inspect the property." My pulse spiked. "Without a warrant or official HoA documentation, you can't enter." Marlene's face flushed. "You must comply." Clara's voice was iron. "I know my rights." Carter took a step forward, his fingers twitching toward his weapon. "Step aside." For a split second, the world held its breath. My mind raced. Distract him, intervene, do something. But then Clara raised her hands, her stance calm but commanding. "Carter, you're making a mistake." Marlene's eyes darted between them, panic flickering behind her composed mask. "Put it away." Carter hesitated, then slowly lowered the weapon. And that's when the sirens wailed. Red and blue lights bathed the street as sheriff's deputies swarmed, disarming and cuffing Carter before he could react. Marlene's face drained of color, her perfect world unraveling in front of her eyes. One of the officers checked on Clara. "Sheriff, you okay?" Clara exhaled slowly. "I'm fine. Thanks for the backup." I reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. The night had peeled back the carefully constructed facade of the HoA, exposing the rot beneath. And this was only the beginning. The neighborhood reeled from the shocking revelation. Carter wasn't just an overzealous security officer. He was a fraud. No credentials. A criminal past hidden behind a fake badge. As Clara and I sipped coffee the next morning, the weight of the night before still hung heavy in the air. "We need to tell everyone," Clara said, setting down her mug. I nodded. "Marlene's influence runs deep, though." "Then we'll show proof." That night, the community center was packed for an emergency meeting. Marlene sat stiffly at the front, Carter's chair conspicuously empty. Clara addressed the crowd. "Last night, Carter pulled a gun on me. He's not who he claimed to be." Gasps erupted. "He had no security license. He has a criminal record." Marlene stood abruptly. "He was vetted." Clara tilted her head. "Did you know his history?" Silence. Mr. Rivera stood. "I propose a reassessment of HoA leadership." A ripple of agreement spread through the room. Marlene's grip on the community was slipping, her carefully constructed empire crumbling beneath the weight of truth. And this was just the start of the reckoning. The battle wasn't over. But the neighborhood was finally waking up. With Carter exposed as a fraud and Marlene's grip on the HoA crumbling, Clara wasn't finished digging. She spent days combing through financial records, speaking to longtime residents, and consulting with legal experts. "It's worse than we thought," she muttered one evening, spreading documents across our dining table. "Misallocated funds, fabricated maintenance costs. She's been siphoning HoA money for years." Mr. Rivera, now acting as an informal leader among the residents, helped gather more evidence. "We need to move carefully," he warned. "If she gets wind of this, she'll try to cover her tracks." But Marlene was already feeling the heat. A notice appeared on our door the next day, a vague citation about improper exterior lighting. "She's grasping at straws," Clara said, crumpling the paper. "She knows we're onto her." It was time to make our move. The community center overflowed with residents. Word had spread, this wasn't just another HoA meeting. This was a reckoning. Marlene stood at the front, her usual commanding presence faltering. "Due to recent unrest, I want to remind everyone that the HoA exists to maintain order." Clara cut her off, stepping forward. "Before we discuss anything else, let's address the missing funds." Marlene stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Mr. Rivera held up a folder. "Documents don't lie. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Fake invoices. Payments to non-existent contractors." A murmur swept through the crowd. "And Carter," Clara continued, "wasn't a security officer. He was a convicted felon. Someone you hired and gave authority over this neighborhood." Marlene's face drained of color. "That. A crime," Clara finished. "And you're going to be held accountable." An officer in uniform stepped into the room. Marlene Carter, You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." The crowd erupted as Marlene sputtered, her control finally slipping from her grasp. As she was led away, the community exhaled a collective breath. With Marlene gone, the HoA was left in disarray. For the first time in years, residents had a say in how their neighborhood was run. "We need a complete overhaul," Mr. Rivera said at the next meeting. "Transparency, fair rules, and real leadership." A vote was held, and a new, resident-led committee was formed. Clara, though declining an official position, helped establish new oversight measures. Mrs. Lynn, a long-time resident, smiled as she spoke. "For the first time in years, I feel like we actually live in a community, not under a dictatorship." The difference was immediate. No more surprise citations, no more heavy-handed enforcement. Just neighbors working together. Marlene's trial was swift. With overwhelming evidence against her, the jury found her guilty on all counts. As the judge read her sentence, she sat rigid, the reality of her downfall sinking in. "She thought she was untouchable," Clara said as we watched the news coverage. "People like that always do." Carter, too, faced justice, his past crimes catching up with him. The neighborhood, once a place of fear and control, was finally free. Months later, the transformation was undeniable. Kids played freely in a newly built park, neighbors hosted block parties, and the air felt lighter, freer. At a sunset gathering, Mr. Rivera raised a glass. "To a real community." The sound of clinking glasses and laughter filled the air. Clara leaned in close, whispering, "We turned the page." I smiled, taking her hand. "Let's keep writing a story worth telling."